They didn't steal a fence line, they stole a horizon. I drove up a dusty fire road in Colorado to scatter my grandfather's ashes and found a shiny stone arch that said Ridgeline Heights, where pine trees used to stand. Paved streets where elk trails once cut through, streetlights like bayonets, beige boxes in neat rows, 96 of them, all with fake balconies and promise signs in the windows. People pushing sofas out of U-Hauls, kids racing scooters, delivery trucks coughing out cardboard. It felt like waking up to find your childhood home listed on Airbnb by a stranger. If you're watching this right now, tell me in the comments, what would you do if someone built an entire neighborhood on your land and told you to go away? I'm Dakota Flint, like the stone, 47, structural engineer, divorced, 2 kids figuring life out. I drive a 2008 Silverado that drinks a quart of oil the way stressed people drink coffee. I'm not special. But my grandfather, William Flint, handed me something special. 47 acres of timber and rock he bought in 1971 with $8,200 in cash and a pocket Bible he used as a ledger. He was a Depression-era man who saved washers and jars, folded receipts like origami, and underlined sentences that reminded him who he was. When he died in 2019, he left me the deed and a note that said, "Don't let the bastards take what's yours." I didn't visit for 3 years. Before you judge me, try being human. There was a messy divorce. There were tuition bills. There were weeks that stretched to 70 hours and months that ended before I noticed they'd started. Still, every April, I paid the property taxes $6,400 on time, online, with the quiet pride of a man who keeps his word. Email receipts, bank statements, county confirmations, all neat, all boring, all real. Then August 2022 came, and I decided it was time to climb the ridge, scatter Grandpa's ashes at the overlook, and say the words I should have said earlier. Instead, I turned off Highway 36 and drove into a mirage that didn't blink. The guard at the gate had a clipboard and a smile that said, "Minimum wage, maximum attitude. Residents only," he told me, like it was a magic spell. I held up a photo of the deed on my phone. He smirked like he'd seen that trick before and told me to turn around. A white Range Rover purred up beside us, and out stepped a woman in linen that looked allergic to dirt. Mid-50 seconds, smooth forehead that never met a frown, sunglasses that cost a paycheck. She moved like the ground belonged to her and air was on retainer. Cassandra Whitmore. You know the type before you know the name. She didn't ask who I was. She asked the guard what the problem was. He said I claimed to own her development. She turned to me with a smile that felt like paper cuts. "If you're looking for work," she said, "crews are full, but leave your number." I told her my name, told her my grandfather's, told her what the deed said and what the county had on record. She lifted her phone and scrolled like she was unrolling a scroll of holy law. "Our title search shows abandonment," she said, "and in Colorado, adverse possession means your empty forest is our thriving community." She said thriving the way people say champagne. Adverse possession. The Instagram version is "Squat long enough, it's yours." The unfiltered version is 18 years of open, continuous, hostile possession, and you pay the taxes the whole time. 18 years, taxes. My grandfather didn't miss one, neither did I. I said that out loud. Cassandra's smile sharpened. "You know just enough to be dangerous," she said, like I'd graduated from YouTube University with a minor in annoying. Then she offered me a card for their attorney and told me she'd already deposited $16 million in pre-sales. Families were moving in before Thanksgiving. If I kept trespassing, she'd call the sheriff, personally. Then she did something that curled my blood. She snapped a photo of my license plate. "Just in case you vandalize anything, sweetheart. People like you don't beat people like us." There's a special kind of silence after someone tells you your life is a lie. It's not quiet. It's an electrical hum in your teeth. I turned the truck around and drove home on autopilot, past the last patch of shade the bulldozers hadn't shaved off. I laid everything out on my kitchen table that night, the 1,971 deed, Grandpa's ledgers that smelled like pipe tobacco and WD-40, every tax receipt like a paper breadcrumb back to the truth. Cassandra had just given me a gift, her arrogance. She announced the plan. She announced the money. She announced the schedule. And she announced, to my face, that I was the kind of man who loses. The next morning, I called the number on her card. The receptionist had that cheerful voice that says, "We do this every day." She offered me $15,000 if I'd sign a quitclaim deed by Friday. $15,000 for land worth more than $4 million. A quitclaim is legalese for sign here to surrender your spine. You sign away any claim without anyone promising you even had one. Maybe that works on people who don't keep receipts. Maybe that works on men who don't have grandfathers whispering in their ear. It didn't work on me. Tell Mr. Kier I'll see him in court, I said, and hung up before she could teach me the word frivolous. I needed a lawyer who treats bullies like chew toys. My buddy Marcus in Cheyenne said one name like it was a secret password. Lydia Chen. She once beat a railroad so badly they asked her to join the board. Her consultation fee was $500 and worth every cent before she spoke. She listened. Not the way lawyers listen to catch you in a lie, but the way farmers listen to the ground before a storm. She asked for tax receipts, and I handed her a file thick enough to bruise. She flipped, paused, flipped again, and her mouth twitched like she'd just spotted a crack in the dam. Adverse possession needs 18 years and taxes paid by the squatter, she said. You've been paying, so their claim is stillborn. I asked if we should rush to court to stop construction. She said no, and the no felt like a chess move I didn't see yet. Let them finish, she said. If you stop it now, they'll file bankruptcy, drag you and 96 families through a circus of finger-pointing. But if you let them build the dream, then you walk into federal court with the deed, the receipts, the photos, and the smell of fresh paint still on their lies. You don't just own the land. You own the houses on it. That's not a lawsuit. That's a foreclosure on fraud. You ever have someone drop a strategy on you so cold it burns? I stared at her like she'd offered me a parachute made of paper. What if they win? She didn't blink. They won't. And if somehow we're in a cartoon universe where they do, your land is already occupied. You haven't lost anything you can still touch. Her plan was brutal because the situation was, it was mercy for the innocent buyers and a trap for the people who sold them a lie. It was patience with fangs. How much? I asked. Because I'm a dad with a transmission that's dying and a daughter with a tuition bill that eats paychecks like snacks. 40 to 50,000 in legal fees, she said, and when we win and we will court awards damages and fees, we'll make them pay me to beat them. I had 12,000 in savings. Pride doesn't swipe a card, so I swallowed hard and signed her retainer. And before I left, she gave me one last rule that tasted like medicine. Don't contact Cassandra, don't post, don't brag. Surprise is gold in property fights. We will not warn thieves that the lights are about to turn on. I drove home, sat at the same kitchen table, and packed my life into a plan. Twice a week, I'd park on the public road outside Ridgeline Heights. I'd film. I'd photograph. I'd log dates and faces and badge numbers. I'd watch framers climb skeleton roofs. I'd smell fresh concrete and diesel and the sweet chemical edge of fake grass. I'd watch a community bloom on soil that shouldn't belong to them and remind myself, the families are not the enemy. The system that sold them a dream on stolen ground is the enemy. And the woman in linen who smirked while she snapped my plate? She just thought she wrote my ending. If you've ever been told you're small, let me tell you a secret. My grandfather left me with his receipts. Small is a word rich people use when they can't measure your resolve. They had a gate and a guard and a lawyer on speed dial. I had a deed, a ledger that smelled like smoke and oil, a truck that needed a new transmission, and a lawyer whose eyes lit up when she smelled fraud. I didn't need to be bigger. I needed to be exact. I needed time. I needed to let them keep pouring money into the hole they were about to fall into. So that's what I did. Nothing loud, nothing stupid, Nothing they could pin on me. I let Cassandra's show go on. I nodded at the guard when he glared. I wrote down the license plates of contractors, the names on their shirts, the days concrete trucks queued like parade floats. I paid the taxes in April again, because that's what real owners do. And every night I opened my grandfather's ledger to the page where he'd scribbled in 1971, after the land deal cleared, paid in full. I ran my finger under those words like a prayer. Paid in full. Not for sale. Not abandoned. Not yours. You're still watching? Good. Stay with me. This wasn't a feel-good montage where justice lands in 60 seconds. It was slow. It was petty. It was expensive. It was humiliating. It was everything bullies count on to wear you down. But it started here, on a road where the forest used to whisper, under a sign carved out of someone else's arrogance. It started with a woman in a white suit calling me a squatter and a deadbeat. It started with me choosing not to swing, not yet, because some fights you don't win with a punch. You win with a paper cut that never stops bleeding until the truth shows through. The plan sounded simple until it wasn't. Twice a week, I parked on the public road just outside Ridgeline Heights and watched a brand new neighborhood hatch from concrete and nerve. I kept my phone on a wide lens and a steady hand, letting the red record dot blink like a heartbeat. Framers moved in swarms, nail guns popping in sync like popcorn. Rebar cages stood like ribs in open foundations. Pallets of tile hissed when the shrink wrap split. I narrated time and date into a whisper. September 9th, 10:12 a.m. September 13th, 4:41 p.m. Because memory is soft, but data is steel. If you're ever in a fight like this, learn to love the boring details. Boring details bury liars. By week 3, Cassandra spotted me. She lifted her phone the way a queen raises a scepter and dialed without breaking eye contact. 2.5 miles of road, and we stared like boxers across a ring. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up behind my Silverado with the lights off, soft shoe quiet. The deputy was young, polite, and painfully aware of whose names were on campaign flyers. He asked for my license and tried to look neutral while the computer in his car argued with his conscience. I told him I was on a public road. I told him the parcel number. I said, "Check the county site. Dakota Flint." He shifted on his heels and gave me the warning without the teeth. If she calls again and says you're threatening her, I'll have to take action. Translation: Donors talk louder than deeds. I nodded, thanked him, and kept filming. He left with the look of a man who wished he could pick sides and keep his job. The next tactic arrived with certified postage. Whitmore letterhead, a tidy stack of words that boiled down to "shut up" or "be sued." They'd circled a photograph of my license plate in red marker like I was a suspect on a corkboard, then wrote, "Document everything in the margin in handwriting that wasn't mine." I carried that envelope to Lydia, who read it and actually laughed, a clean, delighted sound like a glass hitting ice. "They're preserving their own knowledge of the dispute," she said. "Every letter, every photo, every time they acknowledge you exist as the owner while they keep building makes their good faith story melt. Let them spend money to make our case for us." It didn't feel funny. It felt like being stalked by people who wore perfume to the hunt. I drove home with the letter on the passenger seat and rage in the driver's. Then I did what engineers do when things wobble. I went looking for load paths. If this development was a bridge, where did its weight really rest? I built a wall of tabs on my laptop: Boulder County permit portal, assessor maps, corporate filings, campaign finance disclosures, court records. Nobody reads unless they're bored or burning. Whitmore Development was a Delaware LLC, and if you don't know why that matters, just think of it as a hoodie for companies that prefer not to show their faces. The financing traced back to Ridgeline Capital Group in Denver, 3 partners, one of them a Whitmore, Preston, husband. That surname kept showing up in lawsuits that ended with the hushed thump of sealed records. Defects, fraud, no admission of wrongdoing. Money moves like water, It leaves silt and smell if you follow the bends. Next tab, permits. The file for Ridgeline Heights called the land formerly tax delinquent, acquired via adverse possession claim, filed March 2022. Filed, not granted. You don't get to sell a victory you haven't won, and you don't get to build a house on a sentence that starts with if. Adverse possession isn't Amazon Prime, it doesn't arrive because you clicked. It takes years and proof and a judge's signature. They had a claim and a shovel and nothing in between. That's not a mistake. That's a strategy dressed like a typo. I sent Lydia a neat packet. PDFs, screenshots, a flowchart with names and arrows that looked like a detective show prop. She called within an hour, voice bright. "This is better than good," she said. "If we can show knowledge plus action knew it wasn't theirs, sold it anyway, we're not just in civil court, we're knocking on criminals' door." "How do we show knowledge?" I asked. She said, "Leave that to me. There's always a disgruntled somebody. There's always a receipt that didn't get shredded. Just keep your head down and your camera up." Keeping my head down got harder when the next punch landed from a different angle. A county code enforcement officer called with concern, dripping from his voice. An anonymous tip said, "I was running an illegal dumping site on the parcel construction debris, old vehicles, possible hazardous waste." I laughed once, the kind that hurts your ribs. I met him that afternoon. He had sunburned ears and the look of a man who's had to tell too many people to put their trash on the right day of the week. We walked the public edge of the subdivision while he snapped photos of nothing. Fresh sod, new driveways. The only hazardous waste was the HOA's taste in exterior paint. He shut his clipboard with a click that sounded like an oath. "There's nothing here." Off the record, I've seen this before on their projects, complaints filed against neighbors right before approvals come through, like clockwork. He slid me a card and said, "If you need a witness later, I remember patterns." I pocketed the card and felt the strange heat of gratitude and fury at the same time. They wanted fines. They got a witness. I kept returning to the public shoulder like a metronome. October arrived with a skin of frost on the wood stacks and the low cough of heaters in half-built homes. I filmed plumbers feeding red and blue pecks through stud walls like veins, electricians threading wire like careful spiders. I made notes when I saw the same subcontractor vans repeat: concrete, framing, pools. Yes, pools, because nothing says we own this place like a rectangle of blue dug into someone else's inheritance. Every time a U-Haul showed up, my stomach pulled a knot. Families wheeled in nursery chairs and IKEA bookshelves and hope. I reminded myself out loud, they are not my enemy. A scam with a welcome basket is still a scam, and its victims deserve a way out that doesn't burn their lives down. Cassandra played to her audience like a seasoned villain. She started wearing a radio on her hip and a clipboard like a sheriff's badge. She would stroll to the gate to chat with the guard whenever I pulled up, point at me with two fingers, like a director placing a camera, and make a phone call loud enough that even the wind could testify. The subtext wasn't subtle. "This is my world. You are a smudge on it." Once, I watched her stop in front of a couple planting a maple and tell them with the warmth of a snake sunning on a rock that the HOA would measure grass height weekly because standards are what keep property values high. The couple nodded like they were grateful for rules they'd learned to hate. The letters kept coming, another from her lawyer. Another demand to cease and desist harassment, as if pointing a phone at a public street is a felony. Lydia told me to file them by date and smile. Their file grew like a tumor. On nights when the house felt too quiet, I opened my grandfather's ledger again and ran my finger over dates from the 70s and 80s. Fences repaired, timber sold, taxes paid. His handwriting, neat and blocky, felt like a hand on my shoulder saying, "Stay the course." Then I found the soft spot I'd been digging for. Buried in a permit packet was a line item about expedited review and an acknowledgement of a community investment donation. I cross-referenced campaign finance records and found a neat $50,000 flowing to County Commissioner's re-election fund within weeks of Ridgeline's approvals, speeding up like a car that just found an empty lane. Maybe legal, definitely ugly. I logged it. I printed it. I slid it into the folder like a poker player palming an ace. Meanwhile, the sales machine roared. A local blog posted glossy photos, Ridgeline Heights, luxury Mediterranean living in the Rockies. The article parroted the brochure: award-winning schools, community clubhouse coming soon, pools optional, starting in the high 400 seconds. I could practically hear Cassandra writing the copy with a glass of Sauvignon Blanc. I printed that too. When people tell you who they are in marketing, believe them in court. The strangest part of that month was how normal the theft looked. Trucks beeped in reverse under mountain sunrises. Kids tested scooters on virgin concrete because it was smooth and their parents were in love with possibility. A guy in a Broncos hoodie argued with a delivery driver about a missing mattress slat. Life expanded over a lie because life doesn't stop to check county records. If you want to rob a town, do it with ribbon cuttings and open houses. Do it with beige paint and HOA newsletters. Smile while you do it. My anger learned to sit. That's what Lydia's strategy requires. Anger that sits turns into patience. Patience turns into precision. Precision makes a noose out of a timeline. I kept learning new ways to be quiet. When a neighbor walked their dog past my truck and asked what I was filming, I said, "The sky." When a contractor flipped me off, I wrote down his van's number and kept my window up. When Cassandra took a picture of me and loudly told the guard she'd forward it to the sheriff, I waved. She hated that wave. It said, "I see you." It said, "I'm not going anywhere." One afternoon, near the end of October, a white envelope arrived that wasn't a threat, but carried the same weight. Inside was the county's property tax notice for the parcel, due April. I pinned it to the fridge under a magnet shaped like Colorado and laughed once. Not because anything was funny, but because reality has a sense of humor if you let it. They were building a neighborhood on land whose taxes still came to me. I set a reminder to pay them on time. Again. Nothing says owner like writing a check while someone else throws a block party. By Halloween, the ridge smelled like sawdust and cold. I parked at my spot and watched as a moving truck disgorged a crib, a coffee table, and a life. The mother carried a box labeled winter stuff in black marker, and I remembered packing a similar box the year my marriage ended. I hoped for her sake they'd get to keep more than furniture. I wrote the date and time in my notebook and slid it into the glove compartment next to a pair of work gloves and a coiled tape measure. Little tools for small jobs that make big cases. When the sun dropped behind the ridge, the streetlights ticked on one by one, a string of pearls across stolen ground. I started the truck and let the heater cough. The phone on the passenger seat buzzed with a text from Lydia. "Keep logging. I may have a whistleblower." I stared at those words until they burned into the screen. Whistleblowers are like comets. You don't count on them. You just hope you're looking up when they streak by. Before I pulled away, I said it out loud to the windshield, to the mountains, to that stupid stone arch with its luxury font. Patience with fangs. That was the job. Not to rage, not to lunge. To sit on the shoulder of a public road with the law in my glove box and the truth on my camera roll, while the people who thought they owned the horizon kept building my evidence for me. The first hit didn't come from a lawyer. It came from Facebook. One night, my daughter Emma texted me at 11 p.m. with shaking punctuation. "Dad, are you okay? Did you get arrested?" I didn't even have the app on my phone anymore, but I opened a browser, and there it was, pinned to the top of a local community watch group like a public health warning. Cassandra's post used my name like a poison label. She said I was stalking families at Ridgeline Heights, photographing children, threatening residents, claiming to own their neighborhood despite clear legal title. She tagged the sheriff's office and ended with "protect your families." Within an hour, the comments looked like a bonfire, people I'd never met calling me a creep, typing that I should be on a list, posting a photo of my truck and plate number like a hunting flyer. If you've never watched your reputation catch fire in front of you, don't. It burns in a way water can't touch. I called Lydia with my hands shaking. She answered on the first ring and told me not to respond. Not a single word, not even a period. Screenshot everything. Save every share, every comment, every message. Silence would feel like swallowing sand, but she promised me it was the only safe move. She said we'd use it as exhibit malice. I stayed up until 2 a.m., taking screenshots until my eyes blurred. I made folders labeled by hour like I was logging a storm. By dawn, it had been shared 800 times. By 9 a.m., my boss called me into his office and shut the door. Martin is the kind of man who still shines his boots every Monday. He's fair, he's quiet, he looks you in the eye when he gives you bad news so you don't feel ambushed in the hallway. A school district had Googled our firm and found the Facebook post. They asked if I'd be anywhere near their project. He put me on paid leave for 2 weeks, pending resolution, and the words felt like a gate closing with me on the wrong side. In the parking lot, Jenny from accounting, who'd brought me cookies last Christmas, saw me coming and crossed to the far curb like I was contagious. It was a small thing that felt huge, like watching your own shadow back away. That night, someone introduced spray paint to my garage. One word, black and big and sloppy. Pervert. I stood in the driveway with the can still tacky in the cold and called the police. An older officer named Patterson took photos with the enthusiasm of a man filling out a tax form. He promised to increase patrols. He didn't promise the thing I wanted, that this would stop. I slept with a baseball bat by the bed and listened for every noise the house made, like I could hear guilt. The worst part wasn't strangers. It was Emma. She called me a day later with tears in her voice and asked me to tell her the truth. I drove to Fort Collins and sat on her couch while her roommate watched me like a documentary. I laid out the deed, the taxes, the ledger that smelled like my grandfather's workshop. I showed her the printouts from the county site. I explained adverse possession in short words, like you explain a storm to a child. It's loud, it's scary, but it passes if the house is built right. She read everything in silence and then looked up with a steel I'd never seen in her. Then we fight, because I am my father's daughter. She didn't say the next part out loud because I wanted to doubt you, and I hate that I did, but I saw it in her eyes and forgave her without making her ask. Lydia filed an emergency motion the next morning, temporary restraining order for defamation, harassment, interference with business, the legal version of back off. She told me to keep breathing and keep documenting. Meanwhile, the messages kept arriving. Some were biblical, some were violent, some were the kind of threat that pretends to be advice. The last one, on January 11th at 9:23 p.m., was pure ice. Drop the lawsuit or everyone finds out what you really are. It buzzed my phone like a mosquito in an empty room, small, but it meant someone was close enough to bite. I forwarded it to Lydia. She texted back one sentence, "Bring your phone to court." The courthouse didn't smell like justice. It smelled like floor wax and old coffee. I sat outside courtroom 3C at 8:45 a.m., with my only suit pulling at the shoulders and my phone heavy in my pocket, like proof has weight. Lydia arrived in a navy suit that looked bulletproof and carried a briefcase like a locked door. She asked if I was ready. I said no. She said, "Good. People who think they're ready forget to listen." Inside, Cassandra sat at the defendant's table with her attorney, Brian Keir, and a man I recognized from corporate filings without ever seeing his face, Preston Whitmore. He had the tan of someone who vacations where the water is very blue and the conscience is very faint. Cassandra glanced back at me with a smile that had the same temperature as the spray paint on my garage, cold, fresh, and proud of itself. The judge entered Angela Ramirez. Glasses low, patience lower, and the room stood and then breathed again. Keir tried the lawyer equivalent of a shrug. He'd filed a motion to dismiss the day before at 4:57 p.m., a move that says maybe the judge is tired. He stood to argue that I'd abandoned the parcel, that the title company had done a forensic search, that everything was legitimate, and I was a nuisance with a deed photo and an attitude. Judge Ramirez asked one question that sliced the speech in half. Did he pay the property taxes? Keir said yes, but she raised a hand, and the but fell on the floor. Under Colorado statute, adverse possession needs taxes paid by the party claiming it, and the clock is 18 years. Your math doesn't work, counselor. Then she looked at Lydia and said, Miss Chen? And Lydia did a thing I will be grateful for until the day I'm dirt. She didn't start with feelings, she started with a piece of paper. Exhibit A, Your Honor. An email dated the 18th of February 2022 from Preston Whitmore to Cassandra Whitmore. She handed copies to the court and the defense, and I watched Keir's face drain like a sink without a stopper. I couldn't help it. I leaned to see. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Preston wrote that their title attorney said the Flint parcel was not abandoned, that taxes were current, that adverse possession wouldn't hold up. He then laid out a plan. File the claim anyway, push permits fast, sell lots faster, create enough chaos that Flint would settle cheap or drown in costs. Worst case, build everything, declare bankruptcy, let title insurance clean it up. He referenced doing it before in Aspen. He called the risk medium and the reward $16 million. There are words you never forget. The first time you see them naked, risk, medium. Reward, $16 million. My name next to bury him in litigation. It didn't feel like anger. It felt like a room suddenly had oxygen after you didn't know you were suffocating. Lydia's voice cut through. Knowledge plus action, Your Honor. They knew and they did it anyway. That's not confusion about law. That's fraud wearing a suit. Judge Ramirez turned to Preston and asked if the email was authentic. He started to stand, then paused, like muscle memory and lawyer coaching were arm wrestling inside him. Keir gripped his arm like a mother in church with a toddler. The judge's eyebrows said silence means yes. She denied the motion to dismiss, with a tone that said, stop wasting my morning. Then she granted a temporary restraining order that froze all sales, all marketing, all transfers at Ridgeline Heights. And then this part lives in my head, rent-free. She looked directly at Cassandra and said, if there was one more post, one more anonymous report, one more whisper that painted me a danger, she would hold Cassandra in contempt, and I could pick the penalty from the menu. Cassandra's voice, for the first time since I met her, stumbled on a syllable. Yes, Your Honor. We walked out of the courtroom into a hallway that felt warmer than when we'd entered. Lydia didn't gloat. She never does. She told me where the email came from without giving me the name, a former partner of Preston's in the Aspen deal who'd been waiting 5 years to watch him choke on his own playbook. She said whistleblowers always arrive late and on time. It was both. It was everything. The fallout started before lunch. Keir cornered Lydia in the hallway and tried a new tone. Reasonable. Maybe we can talk. Maybe we can make this go away. Lydia gave him a smile that wasn't a smile. Maybe you can bring a number with 8 digits and bring deeds transferring 96 houses to the people living in them. Maybe you can bring resignation letters and a list of assets. Maybe, she said, you can bring an apology that sounds like English and not PR. He laughed without humor. She didn't. He stopped first. On the way to the elevator, my phone buzzed with messages. Emma, my son Tyler, friends, a neighbor who'd seen the news alert. I answered none of them. In the lobby, a deputy pushed through the revolving door with a stack of files and nodded at me like a man who can finally say the thing he wanted to say. Good luck. Outside, winter light hit the courthouse steps like a stage. I breathed in air that tasted like coin metallic, sharp, valuable. That afternoon, the Facebook post that called me a predator vanished. Not because Cassandra found humility, but because Judge Ramirez found her phone number. The group admins posted a bland post removed by request, like the fire went out on its own. The comments didn't erase from my screenshots, though. The threats didn't unsend. The word on my garage didn't peel itself off. Lydia called me at dusk with a list. Keep logging. Don't poke. We'll depose Preston first. The title company is wobbling. When they fall, they'll fall toward us. Also, watch your back. Desperate people make stupid choices, and stupid choices get dangerous when money is melting. I stared at the single word on my garage door under a floodlight and thought about how Cassandra had looked when the judge spoke directly to her. The linen, the tan, the smooth forehead, all of it couldn't hold shape under a sentence that meant consequences. It was the first time I believed this might actually end with the bad guys holding a bill they couldn't pay. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because the threats were gone, but because the truth finally had a voice louder than Facebook. I set my phone on the nightstand with the threatening text still open, a reminder of where we had crawled from and a promise of where we were going. My grandfather's ledger was on the kitchen table with a yellow sticky note on it in my handwriting. Court, 8:45, bring coffee. It looked like a to-do list for a normal life. It felt like a battle plan for the next round. Preston's deposition took place high enough above Denver that the windows made the Rockies look like a postcard you could peel off and keep. He arrived in a charcoal suit with a lawyer who looked like she could smell blood through drywall. The court reporter swore him in with the soft, relentless rhythm of someone who has typed other people's bad days for 20 years. Lydia started like she always, starts small, questions that feel like housekeeping but build a scaffolding you can't climb down from. Name, position, role in Ridgeline Heights, knowledge of title procedures. He answered in that bored, practiced tone rich men use when they believe the floor will hold. Then she slid the printed email across the table. Do you recognize this? Yes. Did you write it? Yes. Did you send it to your wife? Yes. At what time did you become aware the Flint parcel's taxes were current? He tried to widen the answer until it could hide a truck inside it. Our title company advised us that, functionally, the property was abandoned because Lydia didn't blink. That's not what you wrote. You wrote, quote, our title attorney says the Flint parcel is not abandoned. Taxes are current. AP won't hold. Which title attorney? Which call? Which memo? She asked the same question 5 different ways, and he changed his story 4 different times. Sweat found the collar of his perfect shirt. His lawyer shifted in her chair and objected to form so many times it started sounding like a metronome for panic. By the time Lydia asked whether he had ever paid a public official to expedite a permit, his voice had the thin edge people get when they realize the room has shrunk. He said no. She slid another paper. Campaign finance report. $50,000 to the commissioner's re-election fund, 2 weeks before your expedited stamp. He tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. No further questions, Lydia said, and snapped her binder shut like a guillotine. In the hallway, his lawyer dropped her tone and asked for a number. Lydia gave her one with 8 digits and a list of non-negotiables so long it could be mistaken for a confession. The houses go to the families. The company dissolves. Preston resigns from everything with a board and a bathroom, and he signs an apology that doesn't read like a hostage letter. The lawyer laughed once, not because it was funny, but because disbelief was all she had left that day. That's when the attacks changed shape. They stopped trying to win the argument and started trying to ruin the man having it. My son, Tyler, called from the back alley of the restaurant where he worked, breath clouding the air. A PI had shown up in a nice suit to ask his manager if I was violent, if there were incidents, if any coworkers felt unsafe. Tyler is 23 and cooks steak with the seriousness of a surgeon. He doesn't deserve strangers turning his job into a courtroom. I told him to give the man Lydia's number and nothing else. He sent me a photo of the business card. Apex Investigations. Thomas Brennan. I forwarded it to Lydia and paced my kitchen while she didn't answer, knowing she was already doing the scary math about how far people go when the walls start tilting. 2 days later, the IRS emailed me a love letter. Audit notice. 3 years. Irregularities reported by a third party. I do W2 seconds. I donate to the food bank when I can, and once deducted a pair of steel-toe boots because OSHA doesn't care about fashion. There were no irregularities. There was only harassment with a federal letterhead. Lydia called within 10 minutes of my forward and said it out loud, so I didn't have to. This is retaliation. We'll subpoena Apex's client file and connect the dots. If they opened a false IRS complaint, that's a felony wrapped in a suit. Meanwhile, breathe. That last word was a command and a kindness. When the contracts leaked, the panic jumped from my phone into people's kitchens. A real estate blog published all 96 sales agreements, like a deck of cards thrown in the street. Prices from the high 4s to the low 5s. Addenda that made my teeth hurt. Buyers acknowledging clear title. Buyers waiving certain inspections because the builder's reputation was so sterling you could use it as a mirror. My voicemail filled with voices that sounded like the morning after a fire. A woman named Sarah Chen cried into the phone and told me her life savings live in House 67, and her title company just slammed a door in her face because fraud voids coverage like a footprint voids fresh snow. I didn't have a script for that call. I told her the truth. I am not your enemy, and I will not be the reason your kids have to move again. She asked, what happens if I win? I said, you keep your house. She asked, what happens if they can't pay to make that happen? I had no good answer, so I promised to find one. That's when Lydia said the word cameras and meant news, not surveillance. She had a contact, Patricia Hughes, at Channel 9 who specializes in bad men wearing good suits. We agreed to sit down. Patricia showed up in jeans and a blazer with a notebook that had seen rain and an eyes-open kindness I trusted. She asked me to start at the beginning and stop only when I needed water. I told her everything, not because I like microphones, but because sunlight is a disinfectant and this whole thing stank. She asked for documents and I gave her copies. She asked to see my grandfather's ledger and I let her turn the pages with clean hands. The piece aired on a Friday night news block when people are home and scrolling. Drone shots over beige boxes, my face in profile, the ledger under a camera that made the paper look like a holy text. Patricia's voice walked viewers through the campaign donation, the expedited permits, the adverse possession lie, and the email where Preston spelled out his heist like a TED Talk for crooks. She called it a neighborhood built on paperwork smoke. I watched alone with a beer I didn't drink, and my phone lit up like a slot machine. Emma called me crying for the right reason. Martin emailed me, proud to have you. Come back Monday. Strangers messaged me that they'd had their own HOA nightmares and that my fight made something in their chest sit up straighter. The threats came back like a tide. A blocked number texted you, just made the biggest mistake of your life. It wasn't new, it was louder. Lydia told me to vary my routes, keep lights on, and pretend I'm a spy without the gadgets. 2 days later, I came home with groceries and found my front door not quite closed. I had locked it. I know the feeling of a good deadbolt turning. It's a small certainty in a loud world. I backed away and called 911. Deputy Torres was first on scene, plus another car. They cleared the house room by room with hands on holsters, and I stood on the lawn feeling both exposed and ridiculous for wishing the world had simpler villains. Nothing was taken. Nothing was broken. On my kitchen table lay a single sheet of paper with 5 words in block letters. Drop it or lose everything. Torres bagged it like a dead insect and promised prints that probably weren't there. While he took my statement, my neighbor Carol shuffled over in her cardigan like an angel disguised as a librarian. She said she'd seen a black Audi SUV the day before. A man in a suit walk up my drive, stay 10 minutes, leave. She had written down the plate because something felt off. Bless suspicious old women. Torres ran it and came back with a look that said, "The world is small and stupid. Apex Investigations. Thomas Brennan." The same card Tyler photographed behind a restaurant. Torres told me, off the record and under his breath, that breaking and entering without damage is the ghost of a crime. Scary, but hard to catch. He told me I should consider staying somewhere else for a few nights. I texted Emma, and 20 minutes later I was on her couch with a blanket that smelled like her laundry detergent and a baseball bat leaning against the coffee table like a bad joke we'd agreed not to laugh at. We watched a movie with the volume too low and the closed captions on because silence makes room for your brain to write its own horror script. In the middle of this, the title company blinked. Rocky Mountain Title called Lydia's office and said they were ready to talk. Ready to talk is legal, for our insurance carrier is screaming. They handed over emails that used phrases like fast track and we'll make it right after, recordings where a project manager said the quiet part out. Loud, payment records that made the $50,000 donation look like a tip. One email spelled it out. Client insists AP will be granted post hoc, risk acceptable given pre-sales. When Lydia read that to me, the room actually spun for a second because the brazenness hit like altitude sickness. She told me to breathe again. I told her I was getting good at it. Cassandra's side asked for a settlement conference. That's what happens when a dam spiderwebs. Lydia said no. It wasn't theater. It was timing. With the title company flipping and Channel 9 shining light into every corner, we needed a judge's gavel, not a handshake in a back room. Trial was 3 days away. She told me to stay put, keep my head down, and prepare to watch people who have never heard the word no learn the definition in public. On Emma's couch, staring at the ceiling's soft shadows, I thought about the two parallel worlds we were living inside. In one, the HOA newsletter chirped about fall decor and reminded residents not to leave trash cans visible from the street. In the other, a developer's playbook was unraveling line by line, exposing bribes, forged confidence, and a blueprint for theft that had worked in other towns because no one had the stomach or the receipts to rip the mask off. I wasn't brave. I was stubborn. There's a difference. Bravery runs into burning buildings. Stubbornness sits on the curb with a hose and doesn't move until the last ember hisses out. The morning before trial, Lydia called with a voice that carried caffeine and certainty. The title company is cooperating fully. We have the emails, the recordings, the ledger, the campaign finance link, the deposition contradictions, and your tax receipts from 1971 to now. The pattern is the case. Don't post, don't strut, sleep. I looked around Emma's living room at the small artifacts of a life that isn't broken textbooks, a plant in a mug, a pair of shoes kicked off under a chair, and realized what we were really building wasn't a court victory. It was the right for 100 small, normal things to keep happening in houses that were sold on a lie. That's what they never count on. Not just that we want our land back, but that we want everyone else to get to keep their lives. Trial mornings have a different kind of cold. It crawls under your suit and asks if you did your homework. Emma rode beside me, silent, hands wrapped around a thermos like it was a small campfire. When we pulled into the courthouse lot, 2 news vans already staked their corners, dishes pointed at the sky like sunflowers that fed on scandal. I didn't wave, I didn't look. Lydia had taught me the new religion. Don't feed the circus. Courtroom 3C filled like a bus at rush hour. I recognized faces I'd only seen through windshields, residents from Ridgeline Heights sitting shoulder to shoulder, clutching folders, whispering to each other with the anxious politeness of strangers sharing a storm shelter. Sarah Chen sat 3 rows back with a hand on her daughter's knee. I scanned for Cassandra and found her at the defense table in a cream suit that screamed dry clean only, between her husband Preston and a pair of lawyers who looked like they'd been hired to scare daylight. Cassandra's smile was gone. Her jaw worked, chewing on nothing. When Judge Ramirez took the bench, the room exhaled in unison. Lydia stood for opening and didn't waste a single syllable on outrage. She spoke like an architect unveiling a blueprint. Here is the deed. Here are the taxes. Here is the email dated the 18th of February 2022, in which Preston acknowledges the land isn't abandoned, proposes filing adverse possession anyway, proposes selling lots anyway, proposes bankruptcy if caught, and values the reward at $16 million. Here are the permits stamped expedited after a $50,000 community donation. Here are buyers who were told the title was clear. Knowledge, then action. Not confusion. Fraud. The defense tried to paint it as a misunderstanding wrapped in complexity. Adverse possession is nuanced, one of their lawyers said, as if nuance could turn theft into jazz. The title company signed off, Keir added. Like you can outsource guilt. The judge's left eyebrow took notes none of us could see. Then the witnesses started. The representative from Rocky Mountain Title sat down with handshakes that looked like truces. Under oath, he admitted to pressure from the client, assurances that any issues would be resolved post-closing, and off-the-record understandings that made the court reporter pause just long enough for everyone to taste the words. Lydia slid an email across the stand and asked him to read a sentence aloud. Client insists AP will be granted post hoc, risk acceptable given pre-sales. The words hung there like a bad smell. He swallowed and confirmed the sender. He confirmed the date. He confirmed the payment records tied to expedited review. The defense objected. The judge overruled. The court reporter typed. Next came the code enforcement officer Sunburned Ears, County Vest, who testified that an anonymous complaint about my illegal dumping produced exactly 0 debris and a pattern he'd seen at other Whitmore projects. False reports to create pressure on neighbors. He said it plainly, with the weary clarity of a man tired of being used as a tool, and the gallery murmured until the judge's gavel tapped once like a ruler on a desk. Deputy Torres took the stand and described the day he'd been dispatched because Cassandra said I was harassing, how he ran my plates, checked the parcel, saw my name. He testified that I was parked on a public road every time he saw me. He testified that Cassandra seemed agitated and concerned about optics, phrases that could cover a lot of sins but said enough. The defense tried to push him into calling me a nuisance. He didn't budge. Then Lydia held up my grandfather's ledger like a relic you don't joke about. She walked the judge through entries that spanned 5 decades, fence repairs, timber sales, tax payments, little block letters that looked like a man building a life 1 square at a time. It wasn't dramatic, and that's why it landed. Fraud talks fast. Truth walks steady. Call Preston Whitmore, Lydia said, and the air changed. He adjusted his tie and took the oath like it was beneath him. Lydia started with the ground she'd prepared in deposition and stepped on every crack he'd left. Did you author the February 18 email? Yes. Did you understand at the time that the Flint parcel was not abandoned? Our attorney. Did you understand taxes were current? I was advised. Did you write AP won't hold?
Yes or no?
Yes.
Did you nonetheless authorize marketing and pre-sales? We believed. Did you make a $50,000 donation to an elected official whose office expedited your permits? It was a lawful contribution. Yes or no? Yes. His lawyer objected. 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 Lydia let some objections land and stepped around others like puddles. She asked whether he'd threatened me with litigation costs to force a settlement. He denied it. She slid a text thread onto the evidence screen. His message to a partner will fold. We bury him in paper. He complained about context. The judge didn't look amused by context. Call Cassandra Whitmore, Lydia said, and Cassandra's attorneys stood so quickly their chairs skidded. She invoked the fifth. She did it again when Lydia asked if she'd authored the Facebook post calling me a predator. She did it when asked if she'd instructed a private investigator to visit my son's workplace or if she'd approved an anonymous IRS complaint. Every invocation tightened something in the room. The fifth is a right. It's also a kind of mirror. Everyone saw what it reflected. The next few seconds stretched so long it felt like the rain itself was holding still. I saw Vince's free hand inch lower, his fingers brushing the hilt of a folding knife clipped to his belt. The movement was small. Anyone else might have missed it, but I'd seen it 100 times before. The subtle draw right before the strike. I didn't give him the chance. The Glock bucked once in my hands. The muzzle flashed, just a pale bloom against the storm. The judge didn't rule from the bench. She set her glasses down, thanked counsel, and said she would issue a decision within 24 hours. It felt like a cliff we were ordered to stand on together and not move. The bailiff called the next case. The gallery loosened. Outside, the hallway filled with bodies and breath and the buzz of phones. Sarah Chen found me. Her voice shook less than before. If you win? She asked. Does that mean we lose our homes? I didn't look at Lydia for permission. I'd been rehearsing the answer for weeks. You keep your homes. I said, loud enough for heads to turn. Every single one. You didn't do anything wrong. The people who lied to you did. If the court grants me title, we will make it right without breaking your lives. The ripple that went through the crowd felt like a wave turning from black to gray. Then someone started clapping one pair of hands, then another, then the sound filled the corridor and walked the length of it. Cassandra pushed past with her lawyers, eyes fixed ahead like the hallway was a gauntlet. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Hate has a temperature. I felt it. On the courthouse steps, microphones sprouted like weeds. Patricia Hughes asked how I felt. I told the truth, like my grandfather was watching, like the ledger had spoken, like the lie had finally run out of room. I didn't give them victory lines. I gave them the sentence that mattered. Whatever happens tomorrow, the families aren't the enemy. That night, I didn't sleep so much as drift. Every time I closed my eyes, the email sentences flickered, risk medium, reward 16 million, like a marquee that couldn't be unplugged. Emma made tea and pretended to study. We didn't talk about if, we waited on when. The ruling arrived mid-morning, an email that thumped into my inbox with the weight of a gavel. 18 pages, but the first paragraph did the violence. The defendants engaged in a calculated, systematic scheme to defraud Dakota Flint of his lawful property through false adverse possession claims, bribery of public officials, and intentional misrepresentation. Such conduct is reprehensible and will not be tolerated by this court. I read it twice, then read it out loud to a room that didn't need to hear it to believe it. The order restored what never should have been taken. Full title to the 47 acres, inclusive of the structures built atop it. Damages for trespass, emotional distress, and loss of use, $4.2 million. Attorney's fees, $73,000. An injunction freezing further sales or transfers. And a line that tasted like justice with teeth. Referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. I felt something in my chest unclench so fast my vision fuzzed. My phone lit up like a signal flare, Lydia first, with a single word. We. Not I, not you, we. Martin from work sent a sentence he didn't need to send, but did anyway. Welcome back. Patricia's producer wanted a comment. Strangers wrote paragraphs about their own HOAs, their own stolen fences, their own quiet wars with people who weaponize rules. I called Emma. She screamed into the phone and then laughed and then cried and then asked if we could go to Grandpa's Ridge this weekend and read the ruling out loud to the trees. Yes, I said. Absolutely yes. News moved fast after that. Ridgeline Capital began dissolving before lunch like a sugar cube in hot water. The title company issued a statement full of words like regret and reviewing internal policies, and none of the words like sorry that matter. Cassandra's Facebook page went dark. Preston's lawyer filed something that sounded like a life raft built from adjectives. The sheriff's office called to tell me patrols would pass my street more often, given recent events, which was official speak for, we saw the news too. I walked out to the driveway and stood in front of the garage door where the black paint used to shout a lie about me. It had been scrubbed away weeks ago, but I could still see the ghost of the letters when the light hit a certain way. I put my hand on the clean panel and thought about all the little humiliations, the whispers, the looks, the way people step sideways from a man carrying an accusation he didn't earn. There is no line in a ruling that erases that, but there is a point where truth is louder. The victory didn't answer the next question, and it was the biggest one. 96 families lived in houses that now legally sat on land I owned. The law had given me a loaded option, a button I could press to turn other people's lives into moving boxes. That button looked shiny in the abstract and dirty in my hand. The ruling felt like the end of a war. The lives in those houses reminded me it was only the end of a battle. The next move would decide what kind of man I was and what kind of story this would be. I knew what my grandfather would write in his ledger. I just had to figure out how to turn that into a plan that didn't break the people who were never my enemies to begin with. The week after the ruling felt like stepping out of a burning building into air that still smelled like smoke. Ridgeline Capital began dissolving like it had been waiting for permission. Press releases stacked up with words that tried to sound like contrition and landed like sawdust. The district attorney's office called Lydia to confirm they'd received Judge Ramirez's referral. Ongoing investigation became the phrase of the month. Neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid me suddenly waved, sheepish half smiles like they were returning borrowed sugar a year late. I didn't gloat. I didn't strut. I went to the Ridge with Emma on a Saturday morning, stood where Grandpa liked to watch the dawn lift off the pines, and read the first paragraph of the ruling out loud. The wind took the words and scattered them the way I'd meant to scatter his ashes months earlier. It felt late and exactly on time. Winning answered who owned the ground. It didn't answer what to do with the lives planted on it. 96 families, 96 refrigerators covered in magnets and crayons, 96 mortgage statements, daycare pickups, dog bowls tucked beside back doors. The law said I could evict, sell, cash out, turn a fraud into my harvest. The law is a map. Character decides where you go. Grandpa didn't leave me a script, but he left a sentence. Don't let the bastards take what's yours. He meant the land, yes, but he also meant the kind of man I'd be when I got tested. If I turned victory into a payday that left good people on the curb, I'd be speaking Cassandra's language with a different accent. So, I made calls. I called Lydia and told her the line I couldn't stop hearing in my head. We keep the families. She didn't argue. She suggested we make it legal in a way that would outlive mood and headlines. Community land trust, she said. It's a boring phrase for a beautiful idea. The dirt is owned by a nonprofit whose only job is to make sure homes stay in the hands of people, not schemes. The houses belong to the residents through the trust. Equity builds in a controlled way so the next buyer can afford the same dream. Stability gets roots. Predators get locked outside the fence where they belong. We booked the clubhouse that didn't exist for a Tuesday night. Cassandra had promised one in glossy brochures. All that stood was a large room with raw studs and wires like exposed nerves.
The uncertainty.
It was perfect, unfinished, and honest. Word spread faster than official notices ever do. By 6, the space was standing room only. I took a breath and looked out at a cross-section of a county. Nurses and teachers. A retired mechanic in a hat that had seen 30 winters. A young couple holding hands like a lifeline. Kids on the floor coloring on cardboard because chairs were for big people. I didn't bring a speech. I brought the truth and the plan. I told them what the ruling meant in plain English. The land and every structure on it were legally mine. I watched stomachs tighten around the room. Then, I told them what I intended to do with that fact. Transfer their houses into a new nonprofit Ridgeline Heights Community Trust at the prices they originally paid. No upcharge, no interest for balances still owed, no new hoops that punish the innocent for someone else's sin. If you've paid in full, you're done. If you have payments left, you finish them to the trust at 0 interest, and those funds will maintain your roads, cover property taxes, and seed a scholarship in the name of the man who taught me that ownership is a form of stewardship, not a trophy. Silence is a verdict before anyone votes. For one heartbeat, the room was a held breath. Then it broke open. A woman in the front, Sarah Chen, House 67, covered her mouth with both hands. The retired mechanic clapped once, like checking if a drum still had tone, and then again, faster. The sound rose and crashed over us. People hugged strangers. Someone shouted thank you like it was a flare in the night. An elderly couple I'd seen planting a maple walked up with tears running straight down. No shame, and the man squeezed my hand with a farmer's grip that said decades and decency. You're a good man, he told me. I didn't feel like one. I felt like a man who'd been offered a choice and didn't want to look in the mirror wrong. Lydia took the floor with a stack of forms, a whiteboard, and a calm that made bureaucracy look friendly. She explained the trust in short sentences. She outlined next steps: titles transferring to the trust, recorded at the county, a resident elected board with bylaws you could read without a law degree, guidelines for resale that protected both the family's equity and the neighborhood's affordability. She answered questions the way good teachers do, respecting the fear behind them. What if I lose my job? The trust will work with you. We're not a bank. What about property taxes? They're covered by the trust's operating fund. Your payments help maintain that. What if we need repairs to the roads Cassandra never finished? We'll prioritize infrastructure. We've already requested bids. Will the HOA still exist? Not like before. The trust replaces the HOA's power with accountability. Rules will fit the people living here, not the linen suit at a gatehouse. I kept one piece for myself. At the end, I told them I'd be keeping 5 acres at the north end, the part Grandpa called the cathedral because the pines there rise like columns, and you can hear your own heart in their shade. I'd build a small cabin and get on with the business of living a life that doesn't revolve around court dates and letters with italicized threats. The rest belonged to the community. The applause came again, softer this time, grateful without the edge of panic. The paperwork churned. Lawyers drafted documents that turned intent into ink. Volunteer committees formed themselves like honest cells dividing: maintenance, welcome, scholarship. Emma took notes in a spiral notebook and whispered to me later that she wanted to help run the scholarship. We named it the William Flint Memorial Scholarship, $10,000 a year to a Colorado student studying engineering, forestry, or environmental science. For kids who want to build and protect, Emma said, tapping the notebook with her pen. Tyler offered to run a fundraiser dinner at his restaurant once the first checks cleared. We'll serve what Grandpa would have liked, he said. Nothing fussy, food that tells the truth. In the middle of good work, consequences kept arriving at the Whitmore's doorstep like overdue bills. Preston's indictment dropped with counts that sounded like a syllabus for moral failure: wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy. Cassandra took a plea deal that tasted like sawdust in all the right mouths: probation, $500,000 in restitution, and a lifetime ban from real estate development in Colorado. Rocky Mountain Title lost its license and issued an apology that, for once, used the word sorry without a comma after it. Brian Keir resigned from his firm under a cloud described as pursuing new opportunities, which is resume speak for please don't Google me for a month. Channel 9 returned with Patricia to film a follow-up how a legal win became a community plan. She walked the new board through their first meeting and filmed kids drawing with sidewalk chalk under a sky that had finally stopped scowling. The segment didn't end with me. It ended with Sarah Chen's daughter holding up a crayon drawing of a house and a stick figure with a square jaw labeled Mr. Dakota holding a giant piece of paper labeled Deed. It was anatomically wrong and spiritually exact. Patricia won an award for the series months later. She emailed me to say the statuette was heavy. Good, I wrote back. Justice should have weight. I moved into the cabin in October. 2 bedrooms, a front porch, a wood stove that clicks and purrs when the draft is right. In the mornings, mist lifts off the creek like secrets, finally safe to say. Deer nose through the underbrush like they own the joint because, in a way, they do. My truck still leaks a quart of oil a month. I keep a bottle in the bed and top off without cursing because some problems are small on purpose to remind you to be grateful for the big ones you solved. Emma visits with her law student boyfriend who asks sharp questions and then does the dishes without being told. Tyler brings leftover rolls from the restaurant and a laugh that fills the room. Even my ex-wife Jennifer came by once, stood on the porch with her hands wrapped around a mug, and told me she was proud. The sentence landed like a clean nail in seasoned wood, unexpected and strong. Every so often, someone asks me if I regret not taking the money. $16 million in pre-sales turned into leverage I could have used to cash out and buy a different horizon. I don't. Money spends. A trust stands. A scholarship opens a door for a kid who hasn't met the right person yet, and sometimes that's all a life needs to bend toward better. We built something that can't be flipped on a whim, and won't be at the mercy of the next charming thief with a new logo. If you're still with me, if you watched this whole thing with a knot in your stomach because it sounded too familiar, here's the part that matters most. Keep your receipts. All of them. Not just the paper kind. Keep the names, the times, the smells, the faces. Keep your patience with fangs. Don't let anyone call you small when what they mean is obedient. Find a Lydia if you can. Become a Lydia if you must. And remember, the simple math bullies hate. Knowledge plus action beats swagger plus volume every time. Have you ever had an HOA nightmare? A property line dispute? A title that suddenly grew a question mark because someone with a bright smile and a long pen decided your piece looked profitable? Tell me in the comments. Put it on record. We're building a library of ordinary people who refuse to be eaten by the machine. If this story gave you back a little faith that good people can still win when they stand their ground, subscribe. Next week I'm telling you how the city tried to deny my business permit with a bylaw no one had read since 1988, and how the right paragraph turned that no into you're untouchable. Bring your coffee. Bring your patience. Bring your receipts.